Harley waited until Sturgis to make its move, and suddenly a lot of motorcycles we've been talking about all year felt like yesterday's news. The new Deadwood doesn't chase futuristic styling, overload the rider with gimmicks, or try to reinvent what a motorcycle should be. Instead, Harley went back to something experienced riders recognize immediately: a machine built around simplicity, attitude, and the kind of character that doesn't need a long explanation. But looking right and riding right are two very different things. Beneath that old-school attitude are trade-offs that could matter long after the excitement of Sturgis fades. Watch till the end, because the biggest reason to want this bike is also where its biggest compromise begins: Harley's reveal. Harley-Davidson rolled the Deadwood into public view on August 7th at the 86th Sturgis Motorcycle Rally. The setting was Harley-Davidson Rally Point, and the motorcycle did not need a dramatic explanation. The first impression was immediate: low, dark, stripped, and unmistakably Harley. Denim black covered the machine, while orange tank graphics broke through the darkness without turning the bike flashy. Look closer, and the shape stays remarkably clean. A chopped, smoked windshield sits above the front end. The solo seat keeps the rear uncluttered. Black laced wheels reinforce the traditional profile, while the 5-gallon teardrop tank gives the center of the motorcycle real visual weight. Minimal bodywork leaves the mechanical pieces exposed instead of burying them beneath decoration. That matters because riders have seen plenty of motorcycles arrive with styling that requires a press release to explain it. The Deadwood works differently. You can stand 20 feet away and understand what Harley was aiming for. It does not look radical, futuristic, or desperate to prove how new it is. It looks deliberate. That simplicity is what made the first look interesting. Harley presented a motorcycle whose identity was readable before anybody reached for a specification sheet. Whether the hardware underneath could support that first impression was another matter entirely. Appearance got the Deadwood noticed. Twisting the throttle is where the argument starts getting seriously interesting. Low-end muscle. Under the Deadwood sits Harley-Davidson's Milwaukee 8 117 Classic, displacing 1,920 cubic centimeters. Harley rates it at 98 horsepower and 120 pound-feet of torque. More important than either peak figure is where the torque arrives. Maximum torque comes at 2,500 revolutions per minute, placing the strongest pull deep in the range riders actually use. That changes how the numbers should be read. 98 horsepower will not win every bench racing argument. The useful part is the 120 pound-feet weighting low enough that ordinary throttle openings matter. Roll out of a corner, pull away from traffic, or ask for a clean pass, and the engine does not need to be wound tight before it answers. The 2-into-1 exhaust fits perfectly. Harley says its internal design supports performance, while keeping the system compact. From the saddle, the broader point matters. The Deadwood favors accessible shove, rather than a spectacular number living near the top of the tachometer. Experienced riders know the difference. A dyno chart makes excellent garage ammunition, but road character lives between stoplights, curves, grades, and passing lanes. Strong torque, delivered early, can make a motorcycle feel more willing than its horsepower figure suggests. That motor settles the question of shove. The chassis decides whether the rest of the motorcycle can keep up. If the Deadwood has changed how you see Harley's lineup this year, hit like and subscribe. Then tell us what you think. Did Harley get this motorcycle right? Or is the Sturgis excitement bigger than the bike itself? We're listening. Chassis trade-offs. The Deadwood uses Harley's Softail foundation, but its low appearance comes with an engineering trade. Harley shortened the rear monoshock to bring the motorcycle down, pairing that stance with a conventional front fork. Running weight is 686 pounds, so nobody should mistake the Deadwood for a lightweight simply because it sits close to the pavement. Cornering room matters once the road begins bending. Harley lists lean, angle at 27 degrees on either side. That tells riders something useful before talk about stance begins. Lower motorcycles can feel planted and look terrific, yet reducing height limits how far the machine can lean before hard parts approach pavement. That does not automatically make the setup wrong. It defines the job. The Deadwood is not presenting itself as a corner carving machine. The better question is whether the chassis leaves enough usable margin for normal roads while delivering the substantial feel Harley intended. There is also the weight itself. 686 pounds brings stability, but mass still asks something from brakes, suspension, and direction changes. A low silhouette cannot repeal physics. Low motorcycles often photograph better than they corner. Harley's real chassis test is whether the Deadwood keeps enough function after achieving that stance. Road manners reveal one side of that equation. Parking lot confidence reveals another, starting with where the rider actually sits, managing the mass. The number that changes the Deadwood's physical impression is 25½ inches. That is Harley's listed laden seat height, putting the rider close to the ground for a motorcycle, weighing 686 pounds in running order. Seat height without weight tells only half the story. Nobody with years around heavyweight motorcycles needs reminding that 686 pounds is still heavy. You feel mass when backing from a parking space, turning sharply at walking speed, or catching a motorcycle leaning farther than intended. A low seat does not erase that. What it can change is leverage and confidence. Getting both feet down securely gives many riders more authority over the machine at a stop. The Deadwood's low-slung layout keeps the rider inside the motorcycle rather than perched high above it. Its solo seat, handlebar relationship, and foot control placement create a compact relationship between them. That distinction matters with experience. Riders who have wrestled loaded touring machines through gravel lots know specifications cannot describe every awkward moment. Manageability often comes from where the weight sits and how easily your legs reach solid ground. The Deadwood makes a sensible argument for stationary confidence while remaining honest about its mass. Getting it off the side stand is one thing. The tougher test is whether that welcoming position still feels right after hours on the road. Long ride comfort. A low motorcycle can look right, parked outside a rally, and still wear you out before lunch. Harley gives it a solo tuck-and-roll seat, a low stance, and a chopped, smoked windshield, rather than the broad protection of a full touring fairing. The rider triangle looks relaxed rather than aggressive. Your hands meet a wide handlebar without forcing the upper body into a sport bike crouch, while the foot controls place the legs forward in familiar cruiser territory. The windshield deserves realistic expectations. Its compact shape can take some pressure off the chest, but it is not a barn door touring screen. Taller riders may still catch substantial airflow around the helmet and shoulders. The solo seat also favors clean styling over the broad, heavily padded furniture found on Harley's dedicated long-haul machines. Nothing here proves the Deadwood is an iron butt weapon, and calling it one would be marketing ahead of evidence. What Harley has built appears better suited to meaningful road time than its stripped silhouette initially suggests. Comfort decides whether you want another hour in the saddle. Fuel decides whether the motorcycle gives you that choice. Fuel freedom. The Deadwood carries 5 gallons of fuel, and that specification says more about its intended use than another piece of black trim ever could. Harley lists estimated fuel economy at roughly 47 miles per gallon. Real riders know an official estimate is not a promise, because speed, wind, load, throttle habits, elevation, and fuel quality can all move the number. Nobody rides until the tank is mathematically dry. What matters is that 5 gallons provides useful breathing room between stops, especially compared with motorcycles, whose small tanks make the fuel-light part of every afternoon ride. Tank capacity rarely wins showroom arguments. After enough years on the road, however, riders learn how quickly a small tank can dictate the day. You stop when the motorcycle wants fuel, not when your legs need stretching or when the diner ahead actually looks worth visiting. The Deadwood's capacity therefore changes how seriously you can treat the machine beyond local riding. It does not transform the bike into a touring model, and it does not guarantee a particular distance. It simply reduces one familiar limitation. For riders crossing rural country, where stations can spread apart, that matters more than another decorative badge. 5 gallons is easy to spot on a specification sheet. The electronic equipment buried behind that old-school silhouette takes a closer look. Modern underneath. The Deadwood may present itself with traditional lines, yet the electronics underneath belong firmly to a modern Harley. Selectable ride modes let the rider alter how the motorcycle responds, while anti-lock braking and traction control provide assistance when available grip becomes less predictable. Cornering-enhanced systems add another layer by accounting for motorcycle lean during braking and acceleration events. Tire pressure monitoring handles a simpler job that experienced riders appreciate. Pressure still needs checking with a gauge, yet an unexpected change can provide warning before a small problem becomes an ugly roadside problem. Cruise control serves a different purpose, reducing the need to hold one throttle position during long, steady stretches. The instrument arrangement also provides modern information without turning the cockpit into the visual center of the motorcycle. That distinction matters. Electronics are not automatically an improvement merely because engineers can add them. Riders who remember simpler machines often care more about whether technology works quietly than whether a brochure contains another acronym. That is where the Deadwood's approach makes sense. The traditional appearance remains the first thing you notice, while electronic assistance waits behind it. Harley has not removed modern systems to manufacture nostalgia, nor made those systems the motorcycle's entire personality. The clever part is not that the Deadwood has electronics. Plenty of motorcycles do. The test is whether they stay invisible until the rider actually needs them. Those hidden systems strengthen the equipment list. $17,999 determines whether that list feels worth owning. Worth the money? Harley starts the Deadwood at $17,999. That is serious money. So the useful question is not whether the motorcycle is cheap. It is whether the package makes sense at that number. Within Harley's cruiser family, the Deadwood sits above entry points, such as the Street Bob, while remaining below more expensive machines, such as the Lowrider S and Heritage Classic. For the money, the buyer gets the Milwaukee 8 117 Classic, the Softail chassis, tubeless laced wheels, the distinctive denim black treatment, the 5-gallon tank, and the electronic equipment already discussed. None of those pieces alone settles the value argument. Together, they establish what Harley expects the buyer to value. A skeptic can still push back. Nearly $18,000 before taxes, fees, accessories, insurance, or customization is not pocket change. Riders shopping purely by horsepower per dollar can find other arguments elsewhere. Value is not the same thing as low price. It means understanding what your money buys and whether those choices match how you ride. The Deadwood makes its strongest case when the buyer wants substantial torque, a focused solo layout, useful standard equipment, and a very specific Harley identity, without climbing into the company's higher-priced cruiser territory. The receipt explains what Harley charges for the Deadwood. Its appearance raises the stranger question: why make a brand new motorcycle look like it came from another era, built with restraint? Cover the tank badge, and the Deadwood still tells you what kind of motorcycle it wants to be. The shape does most of the talking. Harley kept the fenders visually restrained, dropped the body close around the mechanical mass, and avoided loading the motorcycle with decorative pieces competing for attention. Denim black establishes the foundation. Orange graphics across the tank provide enough contrast to keep all that darkness from becoming flat. Black finishes continue through much of the motorcycle, while the laced wheels add texture that solid cast wheels would not provide. The round intake matters for the same reason. Its shape belongs naturally beside the teardrop tank and exposed engine. Nothing appears designed to steal the entire view. Up front, the chopped, smoked windshield adds height without overpowering the silhouette. Behind it, the solo seat keeps the rear narrow and visually light. The proportions move your eye toward the tank and engine instead of toward luggage, passenger accommodations, or oversized bodywork. That restraint deserves more credit than simply calling the motorcycle stripped. Removing parts is easy. Making what remains look intentional is harder. The Deadwood works visually because the pieces seem to agree with one another. Nothing needs to scream for attention. Those lines weren't created in a vacuum. Their deeper influence reaches into an older American garage tradition. If you appreciate motorcycle stories that look beyond the marketing and focus on what actually matters to riders, subscribe to Motorcycle Heads. We'll keep digging into the machines, decisions, and industry changes worth knowing before they reach your garage next. Custom bike routes. Harley's stated inspiration reaches back to riders returning home after the Second World War. American motorcycle customization, developed through owners who removed equipment, changed parts, and reshaped machines according to their own priorities. Weight, performance, appearance, and individuality all mattered, although individual motorcycles varied enormously. That distinction is worth protecting from nostalgia. There was no single recipe followed by every rider. Early custom motorcycles evolved through experimentation. Owners worked with what they had, what they could afford, and what they could fabricate. Harley connects the Deadwood to that stripped-down tradition. The important idea is not that the new motorcycle perfectly recreates one historical machine. It does not. The connection is philosophical. Remove visual excess, and let the essential motorcycle carry the personality. That mentality feels familiar to anyone who remembers when personalization often began with taking something off. A garage-built machine could become distinctive through subtraction rather than another catalog of decorative pieces. Early custom culture also wasn't born because somebody in a boardroom identified an empty trim level. Riders were solving problems, chasing performance, and deciding for themselves what looked right. That is why the historical connection works best when Harley keeps it modest. The Deadwood can reference that attitude without pretending a factory motorcycle duplicates the circumstances that created it. History explains the stripped silhouette. Geography explains the name Harley chose to place beside it. Why Deadwood? Deadwood is more than a tough-sounding word selected for a fuel tank. Deadwood, South Dakota, sits in the Black Hills, the same region that becomes motorcycle country when the Sturgis Rally fills roads throughout western South Dakota. Riders know the name because the town belongs to the geography surrounding that experience. That gives Harley something most invented motorcycle names cannot buy, an existing sense of place. Deadwood already carries associations with Black Hills roads, old Western architecture, steep terrain, tourism, and the broader culture surrounding Rally Week. Harley explicitly ties the motorcycle's identity to Sturgis and the Black Hills. That documented connection matters because it keeps us from inventing symbolism the company never claimed. Still, there is room for judgment. Naming a motorcycle after a famous riding destination does not automatically make the machine authentic. A badge can borrow history much faster than a motorcycle can earn it. The Deadwood, therefore, has to look believable beside the name. Its dark finish, compact profile, and straightforward presentation give the association some visual credibility, without requiring costumes or Western-themed decoration. Motorcycle names often attempt to manufacture personality from nothing. Deadwood starts with a place riders already understand. Harley's challenge was making the motorcycle feel connected, rather than merely branded. A name establishes identity at the factory. Ownership begins when somebody decides which factory choices deserve to remain. Built to customize. For many Harley owners, delivery day has never meant the motorcycle is finished. Bars change, seats change, exhaust systems get reconsidered, wind protection gets adjusted after actual highway miles. Some owners chase more performance, while others care about fit, sound, or simply making the machine unmistakably theirs. The Deadwood leaves room for that process. Harley identifies factory-supported Screamin' Eagle performance options, giving owners a documented route for changing engine output, without treating the stock configuration as the only possible answer. Intake and exhaust choices can further alter how the motorcycle responds and sounds, depending on the selected combination and applicable requirements. Ergonomic changes offer another direction. A different seat can alter support and position. Handlebar choices can change reach. Wind protection can be adjusted for riders who discover the chopped screen suit's appearance better than their particular height or highway routine. Appearance provides still more room. The motorcycle begins with a strongly defined factory identity, yet it is not buried beneath elaborate bodywork that makes every modification feel like dismantling a finished sculpture. That balance matters. A blank canvas should not mean an unfinished motorcycle. It should mean the owner can see several credible directions without first correcting something obviously wrong. Buying a Harley has long been only the first mechanical decision for many owners. The Deadwood gives them somewhere to go afterward without demanding they change anything immediately. Personalization explains what happens after the keys change hands. One unanswered choice remains. Why did Harley insist the public meet the Deadwood at Sturgis? Sturgis strategy. Harley could have revealed the Deadwood through photographs and a press release. Instead, it chose Sturgis, putting the motorcycle in front of riders already surrounded by the roads, machines, and atmosphere its identity was meant to evoke. Harley-Davidson Rally Point gave the debut a physical stage in the center of that environment. That matters because motorcycles are unusually difficult to understand through a screen. Photographs flatten proportions. Videos cannot tell you how substantial a machine feels when you stand beside it. A specification sheet certainly cannot reproduce the experience of seeing hundreds of motorcycles rolling through the Black Hills. Sturgis changed those conditions. Harley was not asking riders to imagine the Deadwood inside motorcycle culture while sitting at home. The company placed it directly inside one of America's largest motorcycle gatherings, where people were already comparing machines, talking about what they had ridden, and studying motorcycles in person. That setting does not guarantee the Deadwood will succeed. A good launch location cannot rescue a motorcycle people ultimately do not want. It can, however, make the first encounter more meaningful. A motorcycle introduced beneath convention center lights remains a product presentation. At Sturgis, it has the opportunity to become part of the conversation surrounding it. Sturgis explains the stage Harley chose. The August calendar explains why the spotlight suddenly seemed so much brighter. Late-year surprise. By August, much of the year's motorcycle conversation had already happened. Manufacturers had announced machines, released specifications, distributed photographs, and collected the first wave of attention. Riders had already spent months deciding what looked interesting and what did not. Then Harley introduced the Deadwood during rally season. That timing created an advantage that has nothing to do with making earlier motorcycles mechanically obsolete. Those motorcycles did not suddenly lose horsepower, capability, quality, or relevance because another Harley appeared in South Dakota. What changed was the conversation. Newness has a short half-life. A motorcycle can dominate attention during its announcement and feel familiar months later, even while remaining an excellent machine. The Deadwood arrived after many earlier introductions had already consumed that first burst of curiosity. Harley therefore gave riders something fresh to examine, at a moment when much of the year's lineup was no longer unfamiliar. That is the meaningful sense in which other motorcycles could suddenly feel like old news. Being late also carries risk. Arrive without a clear idea, and people simply ignore you. The Deadwood benefited because its presentation was distinct enough to restart discussion without requiring an engineering revolution. Sometimes, the last motorcycle entering the conversation does not need to be the most advanced. It needs to give riders a reason to look again. Attention can make a debut feel enormous. Removing that excitement exposes the compromises the spotlight cannot hide. The trade-offs. Take away the rally atmosphere, and the Deadwood becomes easier to judge critically. 686 pounds remains 686 pounds. A low stance can make that mass easier to manage in certain situations, but nobody should confuse manageable weight with low weight. Cornering clearance presents another boundary. 27 degrees of available lean on either side tells you this motorcycle was not designed around aggressive cornering. Riders who routinely attack winding roads may reach its limits sooner than they would prefer. The shortened rear suspension creates another deliberate trade. Lowering the motorcycle contributes heavily to its stance, yet reduced suspension travel leaves less room for absorbing ugly pavement. Riders dealing with broken roads should understand what that styling decision costs. Then, there is the solo configuration. For someone who usually rides alone, it fits the Deadwood's purpose. For riders who regularly carry a passenger, the stock arrangement immediately becomes a limitation rather than an advantage. None of these weaknesses means Harley got the motorcycle wrong. They show that Harley made choices. A focused motorcycle should disappoint somebody. Trying to satisfy long-distance couples, aggressive corner riders, horsepower hunters, lightweight cruiser shoppers, and style-first buyers simultaneously would produce a different machine entirely. The real test is whether the compromises line up with the person considering the keys. If they do not, the Deadwood's appearance should not talk anyone into ignoring them. With the compromises finally exposed, Sturgis hype can step aside and leave one question standing. Did the Deadwood truly earn all that attention? Worth the hype? The Deadwood did not make every motorcycle introduced this year technically obsolete, claiming that would confuse attention with engineering. Plenty of motorcycles remain faster, lighter, more specialized, or better suited to particular riders. Something subtler happened. Harley challenged the assumption that a new motorcycle must constantly explain its newness. The Deadwood does not demand that riders decode an unfamiliar category or accept complexity merely because the calendar changed. You can look at it and understand roughly what kind of experience Harley is promising. That clarity matters. The specifications then have a straightforward job: either support the promise or expose it as styling theater. Enough of the Deadwood's underlying choices support what riders see that the motorcycle feels coherent rather than assembled around a marketing idea. That does not make it revolutionary. In some ways, calling it revolutionary misses what makes the debut interesting. Motorcycle companies spend enormous effort proving that the latest machine represents progress. More capability, more features, more performance. More reasons the previous answer supposedly stopped being enough. Harley brought a new motorcycle to Sturgis without making newness, its entire personality. Maybe the motorcycle that made this year's machines feel old wasn't trying hardest to look new. Sturgis gave the Deadwood its stage, but the motorcycle had to earn everything that came afterward. It isn't the fastest, lightest, or most radical machine of the year. That may be exactly why it matters. Harley built something riders can understand before anyone explains it, then backed that identity with choices that mostly make sense. Sometimes progress isn't another screen, another record, or another reinvention. Sometimes it's knowing what belongs on a motorcycle, what doesn't, and having the confidence to stop there. The Deadwood may not be the fastest, lightest, or most advanced motorcycle Harley has ever built, but that was never really the point. What matters is whether its simplicity, character, and compromises match the way you actually ride. So, what's your take? Did Harley get this one right, or is the Sturgis hype doing too much of the work? Drop your opinion in the comments, hit like if you enjoyed the breakdown, and subscribe to the channel for more.